Hello everyone, I hope you enjoyed this Halloween special. Have a great Halloween everybody and keep it spooky. Take care. I'm a 32-year-old man, yet it is broad daylight as I write this post because what I'm about to share still haunts me to this day, to the point that merely thinking about it terrifies me. I mean, even now there's chills going throughout my entire body, feeling like I'm a terrified kid. I've only told a handful of people this over the past 10 years because of how terrifying of an experience it was for me. But I feel that maybe it's therapeutical if I share it, so I will. To tell this story and give it justice, I have to tell you of an experience that happened 3 years before the terrifying encounter about this. This is going to be long, but here goes nothing. My name is Joshua. I will change the name to protect the privacy of others involved in this story. Now I live in Arkansas, and in late 2003, near the middle of fall, right before it started getting really cold, my wife and I were invited to camp with a friend of mine and his girlfriend at Sugarloaf Lake in Oklahoma. I say camp, but the actual plan was to meet at Sugarloaf, and my friend, and we'll just call him Bob for this, and my wife went around to see some paranormal places in the Sugarloaf area. So we got there at about 7 PM. I was driving a white 1996 F100, Bob was driving a 1980 something white Celebrity. It was really a piece of crap. Anyway, it was late dusk becoming dark, and we all climbed into Bob's car and he took us around the area. First, to an old abandoned house, but other than some raccoons rustling around, it was a good waste of 2 hours. Then he took us to a graveyard that was supposed to be haunted, a bust, then an old church that was run down and supposedly haunted. Again, yawn. At this point, it was getting close to midnight and my wife and I were getting pretty bored, so I spoke to Bob saying that this hasn't really been that freaky of a night. That's when Bob smiled, saying he was saving the best for last. He handed me a Polaroid picture of a hillside covered in trees in daylight. I asked him what it was, and he asked me if I saw a house or any type of light pole or anything in the photo, to which I replied no. He took the picture back and said, "That's because there isn't any power lines there either." About this time, he turned down an old dirt road and passed a small house. After that, it was 2 miles of dirt roads with wood on one side and a barbed wire fence on the other, with about 2 acres of field connecting to the hillside. Nothing to light the night except for the moon and stars ahead. Now after what seemed like forever, he stopped the car and told us all to get out. We asked him why, and he just walked us to the side of the car where the fence was, the field and the wooded hillside. He looked at his cell phone, which his cell phone and mine had no signal. Now this is 2003, the area had no cell towers, but he looked at his phone and said it was 11:57 and told us all to watch the middle of the hillside. Even at complete dark, I could tell that this was the same hillside from the picture. 2 minutes go by, nothing has changed. Then, at exactly midnight, a small light flickers in the middle of the hillside. Now, a chill runs down my back as my wife, Bob, his girlfriend and myself watch a small light, to me which looked like an old kerosene lantern beginning to move, swaying back and forth. We sat and watched in complete silence for what felt like several minutes when I finally spoke up and asked what the story with this was. Bob replied that he did not know, but the locals told him that at every midnight this lantern will light up, sway back and forth throughout the woods until the sun comes up, then disappearing. Nobody knew what the story was. At the time, I was a 19-year-old who didn't think anything would scare or hurt me. Since there were no houses around though, I yelled out, "We see you." "You're so scary with your lantern." Bob shushed me and seemed pretty annoyed, but it was so late. My wife screamed and pointed suddenly. I was laughing at the time, but my laughing stopped as I looked to the hillside to see a lantern swaying back and forth, but this time it was moving down the hillside to the field at an unhuman pace. Gliding, it began to speed across the field towards our car. We didn't stick around to see what else it did because within seconds, we're all in the car flying down the dirt road back to the lake. We looked back to the lantern, moving slowly back up the hillside to wherever it first started. The ride back was silent. We all sat there in those very tense moments until finally, Bob spoke up saying, "Oh crap, I forgot to put gas in the car earlier and the only store is closed. If we decided to go back out anywhere, it'd be best to take my truck until he could get gas in the morning as he only had about a quarter of a tank left." I said okay, and a few minutes later, we arrived back at Sugarloaf Lake. We had parked by the lake docks and we dropped my tailgate and sat there and talked about what had just happened. Bob's girlfriend was pregnant at the time and told him she was hungry. Bob looked at her and told her that he brought some snacks but she needed actual food. But since the local store was closed, asked if we could take my truck to the next town to go and get some food because his car wouldn't have enough gas to get us out of there. I obliged. We shut our cooler, put the tailgate up and loaded it into my truck. I turned the key and nothing happened. My truck was dead, deeper than dead, no ding, no lights, nothing. For all intensive purposes, you'd think that it was like an EMP went off. None of this is making any sense. This was strange, and after the night we had before, it simply made us all feel very uneasy. We got out of the truck and popped the hood, pulled Bob's car around to the front and attempted to jump my truck with his car. This is when it gets weirder. As soon as we connected the jumper cables to his battery and mine, his girlfriend starts his car and within a couple of seconds between the cable and connectors, smoke appears. There's suddenly fire now. The cables were nothing more than bits of melted rubber and ash. We've never seen anything like this happen before. Bob runs and turns off his car and we quickly take the clamps off of the battery. We then look at each other in disbelief under the moon and starlit night. Did I mention that there were no light poles around, and we both get a bad feeling at the exact same time as we suddenly realise we'd been hearing a distant noise in the lake that was getting louder. It was a motorboat. Now, like I said, this was a time of year that it was starting to get very cold, especially at night. We were bundled up as it was and we were standing still on land at night, but why was somebody on a boat after midnight when it had been too chilly to even go out in the normal day? And the sound from the motorboat was going pretty quick, but we saw nothing. Suddenly, a boat does appear though, and a very bright spotlight temporarily blinds us all. Bob and I tell the girls to get in his car and lock the doors. I reach into my bed in my truck and I give Bob a tool and I pick up another. We're standing in front of the vehicles in the middle. Both the hoods are up and the boat suddenly pulls up to the dock and two heavily bearded men in their 30s or 40s step out of the boat and walk up towards us. It's hard to give an accurate description as their spotlight was still pointed at us. All we could really see was their shadowy figures. I look at Bob and he looks at me. They suddenly look at our vehicles and one glances in the direction of the car at the women and lets out a small chuckle. "You fellas got a sort of car problem?" One of them starts to light up a cigarette. "Yeah, but it's nothing we can't handle," I stammer. The guy with the cigarette sniffs the air and looks between Bob and I. He's trying to see what the ashy stuff is. It's obviously from where we tried to fix the car. "Looks like it is more than your crappy cables could handle. You need some help?" "We got some tools on the boat and I think I can fix your problem right up." Then the other man chuckled and said, fix them right up." Now I'm truly speechless at this moment. I'm sure my mouth was hanging wide open. I can remember as these two men walk back to their boats, we hear what sounds like chains rattling around as we try and make out what they're doing, but the spotlight is so blinding, we can barely see, but the chain noise was enough. Bob looks at me and without saying a word, we both jumped into his car and we drove the hell out of there. For the next few hours, we drove to a populated area of houses, which wasn't many in the rural area. We were pretty much stuck since we had very little fuel, but we all sat in the car, mostly quietly looking around in all directions to make sure that those guys weren't coming back. Bob would turn on his lights occasionally, thinking that he'd see movement in the dark. After a while, the girls fell asleep and Bob and I started talking about how weird this whole ordeal was. He then laughs and said, "I told you it'd be a scary night." I just didn't know how scary this would be. Now at this point, it wasn't even the paranormal lantern that was freaking me out, but the men never showed up, and eventually the morning was on its way, and it was about 20 minutes until sunrise, and Bob asked if I wanted to go and see the lantern to see if it had really disappeared. I asked if he was sure, and he said, "Yeah, I've got enough gas. The local store opens in about an hour, so we'll be fine." I tell him that, yeah, if that's the case, that's fine. We wake the girls up and drive back up to the hill. We get there about 4 minutes until sunrise. We still see that lantern swaying in the woods. Bob now looks at me, and I smile and do the motion for zipping my lips as we all watch him wonder, as right as the sunlight appears, the lantern slowly fades away to nothing. After this, we get back in the car and drive back to the lake, feeling a lot safer now. When we get there, there's no sign of the boat and the hood of my truck is still up and the doors are locked. On a whim, I tell Bob that I'm going to go and try and start the truck again, one more time. He then drove round to where he could go and get cell signal, and can you believe it? The truck started up right away with no hesitation or problem. Then we all went our separate ways, having been happy to see the sunrise and counting our blessings and swearing to leave the paranormal investigation in this area to the others, and swearing that we're never going to come back again to this area and we never want to run into them people again. However, all things fade with time. Fear, common sense for example. 3 years later, Bob, who I haven't seen for almost 2 years at that point, calls me up and says that he has a proposal. He tells me that there's a group of him and 3 others, who are Wickhams, who go out and do seance in haunted places, and asked me if I'd be willing to film their sessions in the haunted places for the records, and that they would even pay me for my services. I'm no Wickham, but I've always loved going to investigate the paranormal. Even after what happened in Sugarloaf Hill, I had an itch that I had to scratch, and I really wanted to get this done. I told him yes, I would love to film, but I had no interest in joining them in what they were doing. He said he was fine with that, and that I would just go and watch them and be there with the camera. So of course, the next question was, where are we going and what am I going to be doing first? When he answered, I had a terrible gut feeling, and I wished so much that I had trusted my gut and told him no and changed my mind. Remember that lantern? Sugarloaf Hill? He asked me this, but was there any way I could have forgot? Yeah? Why'd you ask? I stammered. I told my group the story, and they so badly want to do a ritual there and try and contact that spirit. I mean, it wanted to contact us before. Bob replied, I don't know, man. Oh, come on, Josh. Just trust me, you'll be safe. I'm going to pay you $250 to sit there and film it. He said back to me. At the time, I was about to become a father, and money was tight because of diapers and whatnot, and that money was a small fortune. Not to mention it is my first kid, and my new wife's first kid, so she had been going crazy about me spending money on things that weren't necessary. I really could have done with the money. So because my wife was putting us in this poor house, I had a lot of weight on myself to get the money together. It was against my better judgment, but I accepted his offer, and a week later, I was in the same beatdown celebrity Bob was driving 3 years before. This time with Bob and 2 guys and 1 girl who were complete strangers to me. They were dressed very goth and had these pentagram necklaces or something. Now it was around 11:50 when we got there, and there were 4 of them sat in a tight circle, and I was behind them about 5 feet from the barbed wire fence that was in front of the field that led to the hillside, and my back was to the hillside and the bushes at the fence lining, and I was filming my friends in a circle as they all started chanting, well, something. As I've been typing this post, the entire time, I've been getting knots in my stomach knowing I was coming up to the part of the story that still haunts my dreams and waking hours to this day. I'm gonna do my best to describe how the following events unfolded, though mere words simply cannot describe the pure terror that ensued or how horribly horrific the events were. So when reading or listening to this, please turn on your imagination, and believe me when I say up to this point in my life, I was interested in the paranormal. It was a fun hobby to go out ghost hunting or getting myself spooked or whatever, but after this, I never look at the paranormal as fun, or even interesting anymore. I show it respect and stay as far away from it as possible. As much as I dread it, I'm now gonna finish my story. This is my story. As his group is chanting, Bob lights up this huge candle in the middle with them and opens up some kind of book. It's not a scary antique spell book or anything, it's like a newer hardcover. Anyways, he's reciting words from it and he looks at his cell phone. He tells the group, quick, be quiet, look at the hill. I turn the camera on at midnight and the dot lantern appears. One member of Bob's group suddenly calls out, "Cole." I roll my eyes since these people were dressed way too differently to say a word like cool. It seemed out of their vocabulary. Then, Bob says to his group to join hands as they attempt to communicate with the spirit. I turn my back to the light and begin to film the group as they began to chant again. Bob reads from the book. They start asking questions in hope that it's going to reply. About this time, the wind picks up and Bob's candle goes out. He tells everybody to hold on and tells me, cut the camera for a minute. I oblige and stop recording and watch as Bob tries his lighter 2 more times for his group, but none of the lighters are working. I'm sitting down and watching the group when I started to hear rustling behind me. I jump up, leaving the camera on the ground to spin around. Bob and his group are preoccupied with their candle and lighter problem. As I spin around, I'm blinded by the brightest light that I've literally ever seen. What I believe was the lantern up close and personal. As soon as it appeared though, it was gone. The lantern is now nowhere to be seen. If it had been the lantern that blinded me, it moved from the hillside across a field right behind me without me even noticing. I then look around on the hillside for the lantern and see literally nothing. It was only 12:15 or so, and the light has always stayed out until sunrise. At this moment, the wind blows quiet and I hear Bob's lighter finally spark up. I mutter, did you guys see that? They all turned around and said, what am I talking about? But before I can even answer them, we're all stopped dead in our tracks by a distant laughter coming from seemingly nowhere and everywhere around us but distant, at the moment like it's far off. And this is no ordinary laughter. This laughter sounds like the laughter of hundreds, maybe even thousands of children. It still haunts me to this very moment. Even as I type this, I'm looking around my room that I'm in. Whenever I think or talk about this experience, I can remember vividly just how terrifying it was to hear them, even just then in my head. The best and only way that I can describe this laughter to you is that if you imagine listening to a large group of kids singing row, row, row your boat, you know one kid will start seconds later, another will join in starting at the beginning of every song and so on and so forth. Well, like I said, hundreds or thousands of children laughing. As if one would start and seconds later, another one would join, and this pattern went on in an absolutely endless loop. I'm not saying the laughter sounded like they're singing row row your boat, just the way that they were singing in unison. I don't know, it's the only way I can think to describe it to you. One would start and then seconds later, another and then another and so on. This was getting louder and closer. There was Sinister laughing too, Goofy laughing, giggles from all around us in all directions. I was shaking. I couldn't move. I was spinning around trying to see where it was coming from. This cannot be real. This sort of thing does not happen. Why was it happening? I scream at Bob and his group that we need to get out of there, but they're already running for the car, leaving their wicker book and the candle right behind them, and without hesitation I run after them and jump in the car as the laughter is becoming deafening. We all haul us out of there and drive about a mile away and pull up as Bob is in no condition to drive as we're all freaking out. We all jump out of the car, pacing around the car, asking if this was real what we just heard. I tell Bob that I'm sorry I left his camera behind. He doesn't care. He's not going to go back for it. At this point, I get on my knees and I'm praying and I'm trying to catch my breath. I've never been so terrified. This is when all our chatter stops, as once again, we hear it. That laughter, off in the distance very quietly. At first, but slowly getting closer and closer and louder until once again, it becomes deafening. We all jump back in the car and speed away. We drive for about 6 miles, and for the first 3 miles we can still hear the laughter in the distance with our windows down a little. We all began to calm down little by little, and by the 4th mile, when the laughter can no longer be heard, and with no intention of pulling over, Bob's friend in the passenger seat has his cell phone out and quickly tries to see if he can get a signal. After about 6 miles, Bob's friend says that he got 4 bars. He hands a phone to Bob, who calls a friend who is into the occult. He's very well versed and educated in it, and as we're driving, he's describing what happened to the lady. Bob later told me that his friend believes that it was the laughter of children of Hecate or something like that. I have no idea what Hecate is, but it sounded like more of a guess to me. Anyway, Bob is on the phone speeding out of the area. The 2 people in the back of the car all get chills at the same time, and they later told me that, just like me, the hair on the back of their neck stood up as loud snapping noises come from the front end of Bob's car, and Bob's celebrity stops dead in its tracks, and no longer will move. He tries everything, but the car won't go. The friends that Bob was talking to on the phone were only 20 minutes away and said that they would come in. As we sat in that car, nobody spoke to each other. After about 3 minutes, we saw a pair of headlights coming down the road towards us. We knew that this was too soon to be Bob's friends, and me and Bob thought that maybe we could get a ride from a local, and we all unloaded out of the car and stood in front of it waiting for the car to stop. Now, I cannot be certain, but my gut tells me that I'm correct, but the vehicle doesn't stop. But as it comes into view, it's an old beat up truck and it slows down, and in the truck there's 2 men in the 30s or 40s, both with huge beards, and they stare at us as they sped by. I look at Bob, and before I can speak or say anything, he says, "That's the guys in the boat." Before I can even say anything, we see headlights coming from the direction of the truck that passed by, and it's the same guys staring at us. Bob called his friend back and told her to drive like hell now. He hung up, and 4 or 5 minutes go by and we see headlights come in. We all get relieved and we're thinking that it's Bob's friend. Then his phone rings. It was a lady who was coming to get us, telling us that she took a wrong turn and she'd be about 10 or 15 minutes. Bob hangs up the phone and watches in terror, as I do, as the same truck slowly passes by, this time with only one of the boatmen in the truck. This time though, the driver slowly comes to a halt and says, "Look like you guys could use some help," and then speeds off. This cemented the fact to Bob and I that we were definitely dealing with the same guys who we saw in the boat that time. But why wasn't the other guy in the passenger seat? And to make matters worse, at this point, something we'd almost completely forgotten about due to the boatman was immediately reminded to us as we once again heard that same laughter off in the distance, but all around us like before, and again, over the next few minutes it was getting closer and closer to us. I was almost peeing my pants at the sound of this, and it was getting deafening. We had nowhere to run this time. I suddenly see there from behind our car, off in the distance, 2 sets of headlights coming on and 2 vehicles coming towards us slowly down the side of the road. They take up the entire width of the backcountry road coming our way. The laughter now seems to be coming from the woods on both sides of the road that we were stuck on. It was almost like the children were zeroing in on us, and the sounds of hundreds or thousands of children were only within reaching distance. Apart from that, all we could hear was the crunch of tyres of the cars that were coming towards us slowly. With our last shred of hope fading away into the laughter of the children and the headlights of the 2 vehicles surely being driven by the boatmen, we're given reprieve as this time, coming from the other direction, we see another set of headlights coming fast. We hold our breath. The laughter, the boatmen, what could be next? That is when the vehicle that was coming up fast pulls up. It's Bob's friend. She unlocks the doors of her car, rolls down the windows and begins to tell us to jump in. When this happens, 2 sets of headlights coming from the other direction turn off, and Bob's friend says, "Oh my god, you weren't kidding about the children's laughter," and she screams at us to get in. We begin to tell her about the boat guys as she turns the car around, and sooner than she starts to drive away, the two sets of headlights come on again, this time with their bright lights on. They're only about a car's length away. They begin trying to ram the car. I yell at the driver, "Go, go, go." She then floors it for the next mile or two, and the two vehicles stay right up behind us, and they turn off onto a side road. For about the next 2 miles after that, we can still hear the laughter way off in the distance with our windows down. After 3 miles, the laughter was gone. To this day, I still have no explanation to what happened, what the children laughing were, why the laughing followed us, if the boatmen were really connected to all of this somehow, or if they are merely a coincidence and they live by it. It's weird, but if that was the case, why did they not react to the laughing of the children? Is the lantern connected to the children, or did Bob mistakenly call forth the laughing from the ritual? I don't have the answers to these things. I don't think I want to know them.